This week in economics on the 28th of June 2015 numbers man here. We'll start with the ongoing crisis in Greece. We'll call it a crisis, but in effect it is what has happened to that particular country surrounding its creditors and the creditors' position, which is intransient, no doubt about that. Greece will hold a referendum called by their Prime Minister, Alexis Tsipras, on the 5th of July. The Parliament has backed the plan, and the Eurozone partners, of course, this is from the BBC, have criticized the referendum and rejected its request to extend the bailout to beyond the 30th of June. Now, after the 30th of June, their program will end. Greece could default on the 1 billion euro repayment to the International Monetary Fund due on that date. And according to BBC, there are fears that the country may leave the euro and its economy may collapse without the bailout funds. The Prime Minister's motion on a referendum easily won backing of the Parliament there in Greece. 179 MPs voted in favor of it. That was early this morning, Sunday. And the Prime Minister Tsipras described the creditors' proposal as an insulting ultimatum and said the no vote on the 5th of July would strengthen Greece's negotiating position. Now, this is basically what we call in the U.S. a game of chicken. Well, the Greeks have decided that they will play the cards that they are dealt and play their hand out, which means they will default on the 30th. Now it will be in the hands of the EU governments to decide what they're going to do, or their accounts will be, as one would say, $1 billion in arrears. Now they have asked for an extension, and of course it was rejected. And the Eurozone financial ministers rejected, that was on Saturday, Greece's proposal for a bailout extension beyond the Tuesday deadline. The Eurozone statement says Greece has broken off negotiations over a new bailout deal unilaterally. And as the BBC analyst Chris Morris says, it's not over till it's over. That is definitely clear there. But the end is peculiarly close, according to him. The breakdown in talks between Greece and its creditors has to be seen as a failure, no doubt about that. But the problem there was the creditors themselves were not negotiating in good faith. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. It was a massive gamble on all sides, and a possible turning point in the history of the Eurozone. There will still be those working feverishly behind the scenes for a compromise. The problem here is this age-old thing called austerity. Even the IMF had been pushing that, and then they decided not to push it. It has been literally destroyed economies of various countries in the past. It doesn't work. They tried it in the UK. It's not working there. They tried austerity in the U.S. on something called sequester. It did not work here either, and it will not work any place. The old idea, this is more to deficits than obviously default alone, but the idea of taking a country's deficit and comparing it to a household checkbook is in itself a for us. It is beyond the comprehension of what is actually going on. And it is an attempt by politicians in these countries, particularly with deficits, to put it in a very simplistic standpoint. But to compare a household budget of an individual to a country of millions of people is farcical, at best. Thus, those kinds of ideas cause these little, we'll call hiccups along the way. On back to Mr. Morris's analysis, he is speaking from Brussels. When the Greek government thought it had made significant concessions at the beginning of the week, the creditors said it simply wasn't enough. And while no one can say for certain that Greece will leave the Eurozone, it's in uncharted territory. Now, it does not have to leave the Eurozone unless Germany pushes it out of the Eurozone. Much will depend on the outcome of referendum called there, and much will also depend on the European Central Bank, and whether it believes it can still allow funds to flow to prevent banks in Greece from collapsing. Well, the collapse of Greek banks, I think what these people assume, they can put up a temporary firewall to lessen the pain. The European group had their Gerard Despad said it would now be up to the European Central Bank to decide whether to continue providing emergency liquidity funding to Greece's banking systems. Lagarde, we were just listening at Christine Lagarde told the BBC that because the European part of Greece's bailout program would expire by the 5th, any referendum related to proposals and arrangements are no longer valid. And she said that there is a resounding yes to stay in the if there is, then the response would be a resounding let us try. Meanwhile, queues have formed outside Greece's banks in the past few days, concerns that the central bank may start restricting withdrawals. In our opinion, they should have started restricting withdrawals much long ago. Now, this is what the schedule or timetable actually looks at. The Trunkers bailout program ends. $1 billion there is due on the 30th. On July 1st, no bailout program means no emergency liquidity from the European Central Bank. And the referendum will be on the 5th. On the 10th, Treasury bills worth 2 billion euros to be repaid. And on the 20th, bonds worth 3.5 billion euros to be paid to Eurozone partners. They will obviously not be able to do this. And on the 20th, bonds worth 3.2 billion to be repaid. Now, this is a situation that obviously the Greek government cannot do. Thus, the talk here and the negotiations themselves have been a Trojan horse type situation. And in Greece itself, with 26% official unemployment, you can only say that they're in a depression. And things that happen there is one of the situations that come about when a nation is in a depression. Let me jump along here with other news while we're here at the BBC. Excuse me. This is on the 26th of June. China's brokerage security soared after IMP. Here, the shares in the Chinese brokerage Jata has soared after the debut. Let me get this right. rising of 4.8 billion in Chinese biggest public offering. Its shares rose by a maximum limit of 44% in Shanghai to spend overall marketing falling more than 6%. The IP, which accounts for 20% of the state-owned firm, raised 30.1 billion yuan, and that is $4.8 billion and 3 billion pounds. Shanghai markets have seen new listings this year. The Shanghai Composite Index is near 35% this year, despite increasing volatility in trading, and you could expect that. Last week, the index fell by more than 13%. In an attempt to cool the market, Chinese regulators have tightened rules for margins, financing, which investors borrow money, the old options thing, from brokerages to buy shares. So this is in China, and thus it moves along as in many nations around the globe would move on. Let me get to Uber here. Their shares have cracked down. This is in France. The French Interior Minister has ordered a ban on the low-cost car-sharing service Uber Pop after a day of nationwide protests by taxi drivers. And this has happened in many cities. The announcement follows a day sometime violent protests by French taxi drivers who say the U.S.-based firm Uber is stealing their livelihood. And U.S. rock singer Courtney Love Coburn was caught up in the unrest. She tweeted her frustration, saying her taxi had been ambushed as she left the airport. Well, so what? Crybabies all around. Uber officials have insisted they will continue their activities until France High Court rules. Well, that was coming, and in many other countries it's also come. Taxi drivers blocking access to Marseille and the train stations and protests there in Marseille. French taxi drivers who have to pay thousands of euros for a license say they are being unfairly undercut by Uber Pop. French licensed drivers have lost between 35 and 40% of their income over 2 years because of growth of Uber Pop, and that has been a problem in many nations. This Uber has lost court battles in California, labeling their drivers as independent contractors, when in fact they are controlled by Uber. This is what is called the dark side of technology, Uber being a technological type organization out of Silicon Valley in San Francisco. Uber says it has 1 million users in France and 250,000 for Uber Pop. Uber also operates a luxury service which is not, I guess, banned there in France. Let's move on now to we'll get Nike while we're here. The shoemaker. They're up 24% in profits. The company said its income increased, rose $865 million in the 3 months ending in May to an increase of $698 million a year earlier, better than the analysts had expected. And its Converse brand also saw a rise. I didn't know they had bought Converse. But anyway, nonetheless, the company's largest market, North America, saw sales rise by 13% in the quarter. help offset the effects of a strong dollar, obviously, in the international sphere.